My name is Clara and I'm 35. I was on a call with our biggest client in Dubai speaking Arabic, sealing a deal that took months. My heart swelled with pride, my voice steady as I navigated the client's questions, their trust a quiet victory. The office around me was a hum of routine papers, shuffling phones ringing softly. Then the new CEO Nathan barged in, his cologne sharp, his face set. Oblivious to my call, he slapped a termination letter on my desk, the paper stark against my notes. Replaceable, he called me. Old. Useless. The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. The client Ahmad heard it all, his silence on the line deafening a pause that stretched too long. I fumbled an apology, my cheeks burning. How do you walk away when you're the only one holding things together? Have you ever been undervalued at work? Felt your worth erased in a moment? Share where you're watching from below, and if this resonates, please like and subscribe. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, the receiver slick with sweat. Ahmad's voice lingered, polite but shaken, asking if everything was okay. I stared at the termination letter, Nathan's scrawl jagged like it was written in haste. 7 years at this firm, and it ended with a single page crumpled at the edges. I tucked it under a stack of client files, hoping to bury the sting, but it clung sharp and relentless. My office felt smaller, the walls pressing in the air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and printer ink. A photo of my father caught my eye, his smile warm beside a stack of books he used to teach me Arabic. He'd been so proud when I landed this job, calling it my chance to shine his voice bright over our old kitchen phone. Now I wondered if I'd let him down, if I'd squandered his belief in me. I forced myself to stand, smoothing my blouse, the fabric cool against my skin. My legs felt heavy, like wading through water, as I headed to the conference room. Nathan had called an all-hands meeting, and I couldn't hide, though every instinct screamed to run. The hallway buzzed with whispers, my colleagues' faces tight with worry, their eyes avoiding mine. Samantha caught my gaze. Her nod a quiet anchor, her familiar braids swinging as she moved. She'd been with me through late nights, crafting pitches, her laughter pulling me through deadlines, her coffee always too sweet. I slipped into a seat beside her, my stomach twisting, my fingers clutching my pen like a lifeline. Nathan stood at the head of the table, all sharp suit and sharper grin, his tie, a bold red that screamed confidence. He launched into his vision for modernization, his words dripping with buzzwords: efficiency, scalability, disruption. Each one felt like a jab aimed at people like me. He spoke of streamlined processes, cutting-edge tools, a younger, hungrier team. I felt my jaw tighten, my teeth pressing together. At 35, I wasn't old, but his gaze skimmed over me like I was invisible, a ghost in my own workplace. He praised the new hires, singling out Ethan, a 24-year-old who joined last month. His hair gelled, his laptop open to a flashy presentation that screamed ambition. I shifted in my chair, my skirt catching on the rough fabric, thinking of the deals I'd closed, the clients who trusted me because I spoke their language, not just in words, but in culture. I'd learned their holidays, their business customs, their unspoken expectations. I raised my hand, my voice steadier than I felt the words rehearsed in my head. I mentioned our retention rates, how our Middle Eastern accounts had doubled under my lead, how Ahmad called me directly with questions. Nathan cut me off, his tone clipped, his hand slicing the air. He said the future was in automation, not outdated methods. The room went quiet, eyes darting to me, then away, the silence heavy as a held breath. Samantha squeezed my knee under the table, her whisper barely audible, her breath warm against my ear. "Keep your head up," she said. But Ethan's smirk grew, his pen tapping smugly, and I felt the weight of Nathan's words settle in, cold and unyielding. Outdated. Was that what I was? I thought of my father's lessons, his voice patient as he drilled me on verbs, his kitchen table cluttered with flashcards. He taught me to bridge worlds, to listen deeply, to hear the stories behind the words. Had I been fooling myself, thinking that mattered in a place like this? As the meeting ended, I lingered, pretending to check my phone, its screen a blur. Samantha stayed, her voice low, her fingers twisting a loose thread on her sleeve. She'd heard Nathan talking to HR about outsourcing translations, replacing people like me with software. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading. I'd spent years building trust with clients like Ahmad, learning their quirks, their values, the way Ahmad's voice softened when he mentioned his daughter's graduation. Could a machine do that? I wanted to believe it couldn't, but doubt crept in cold and heavy like a fog I couldn't shake. Back at my desk, I opened my email, hoping for a distraction, something to anchor me. There was a message from Ahmad sent just after our call, his words formal but warm. He thanked me for my work, then mentioned a major project coming up, one that needed my expertise, my voice. My heart lifted a flicker of hope, then sank just as fast. If Nathan had his way, I wouldn't be here to see it through. I stared at my father's photo, his eyes steady, his smile unwavering. I wanted to make him proud, but right now I wasn't sure how my reflection in the glass frame, pale and uncertain. I closed Ahmed's email, my throat tight, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The office hummed around me, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, but it all felt distant, like a radio tuned to static. I grabbed my coffee mug, the one my father gave me, with a cheesy "World's Best Daughter" scrawl, its weight familiar in my hand. I headed to the break room, needing air, or at least a moment to think. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows, and I caught my reflection in the glass door. My eyes looked tired, older than I felt, the lines deeper than I remembered. Was Nathan right? Was I holding on to something that didn't matter anymore? A relic in a world racing forward. In the break room, I poured coffee, the steam curling up like a faint promise, the machine gurgling softly. Samantha slipped in behind me, her footsteps light, her voice hushed. She said she'd overheard Nathan in the elevator telling HR I was resistant to change, a problem to be managed. My grip tightened on the mug, the ceramic hot against my palms. I'd given this company everything: late nights, weekends, learning clients' family names, their kids' birthdays, the way Ahmad liked his reports, concise but detailed. And now I was a problem, a box to be checked off. I sank into a chair, staring at the table's chipped edge, its surface worn from years of hurried lunches. Samantha sat across from me, her eyes soft but urgent, her hands folded tightly. She said Nathan was pushing for more cuts, targeting anyone over 30, anyone who didn't fit his sleek vision. I wasn't the only one in his sights, but I was the loudest, she said, her voice catching. I wanted to laugh, but it caught in my chest, a bitter knot. Loud, I'd barely spoken up, my voice always measured, careful. I thought of my father, how he'd sit with me at our kitchen table, teaching me to pronounce words with care, his glasses slipping down his nose. He'd say language was a bridge, not a wall. I'd built those bridges for this company, and now they wanted to tear them down brick by brick. Back at my desk, I tried to focus, pulling up a client report, the numbers blurring on the screen. But my eyes kept drifting to the stack of files, the years of work I'd poured into this place, each folder a story of late nights and small wins. A notification pinged, sharp and intrusive. It was an internal memo from Nathan announcing a new training program for the younger staff, Ethan's name bold at the top, praised for his fresh perspective. My stomach churned, a slow, sickening twist. I'd trained half the team myself, spent hours mentoring, sharing what my father taught me, my voice patient, as I explained cultural nuances. Where was that in his memo? Where was I? I stood to stretch, pacing to the window, the glass cool against my fingertips. Chicago's skyline glittered, all sharp edges and ambition, a city I'd come to after college, chasing a dream my father believed in. He'd call me his star, his voice warm over crackling phone lines, saying I'd make the world listen. Now I felt like I was shouting into a void, my words lost in the wind. Samantha texted, asking if I was okay. I typed a quick reply, fine, but my fingers hovered over the keys, the lie heavy. I wasn't fine. I was unraveling thread by thread. Then I heard Ethan's voice, loud and smug, from the cubicle across the hall. He was on a call, bragging about his new role, saying he'd streamline the Middle Eastern accounts with a few clicks. I froze, my breath shallow. Those were my accounts, my clients, their trust earned over years of calls and careful listening. I leaned closer, catching his words, his tone careless. He said translations were easy. Just plug them into software, no need for old school methods. I wanted to storm over, tell him about the late night calls, the cultural nuances I'd learned to navigate, the way Ahmad's voice lifted when I got it right. But my feet wouldn't move, rooted by a fear I couldn't name. I sat back down, my pulse racing, my hands clammy. Another email popped up, this one from HR, formal and cold. They wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss my transition. Transition. The word felt like a slap, sharp and stinging. I clicked it shut, my hands shaking, the mouse slipping under my fingers. I thought of my sister Rachel, who'd been texting me to quit, to walk away before they could push me out. She didn't understand. This wasn't just a job. It was my father's legacy, the part of him I carried in every word I spoke. But as I looked around at the sterile office, at Ethan's laughter echoing through the thin walls, I felt it slipping like sand through my fingers. If I didn't fight, what would I have left? I stared at the HR email, the word transition burning into me, each letter a weight. My desk felt like a trap, every file and sticky note a reminder of what I was about to lose, their edges curling from years of use. I shoved my phone into my drawer. Rachel's texts unanswered, their urgency a pressure I couldn't face. She meant well. Her voice always fierce, but her push to quit felt like giving up on Dad's dream, on the hours we'd spent together, his patience my anchor. I grabbed a client binder, hoping work would steady me, its pages heavy with notes I'd written in careful script. But Ethan's voice lingered, his smug tone slicing through my focus. His words about streamlining my accounts, a mockery of everything I'd built. The next morning, Nathan's assistant pinged me about shadowing her message, curt. Ethan would join my client calls to learn the ropes, as if my work could be taught in a day. I nearly laughed, the sound bitter in my throat. Learn, he was being handed my job gift-wrapped. I walked to the conference room, my heels clicking too loud on the tile, each step echoing my dread. Ethan was already there. His laptop open, a glossy smile plastered on his tie, too bright against the muted room. Nathan stood beside him, clapping his shoulder like they were old pals, their laughter a wall I couldn't breach. I nodded stiffly, taking a seat, my notebook clutched like a shield, its leather cover worn from years of meetings. We dialed Ahmad, his voice warm but formal through the speaker, a familiar cadence that usually calmed me. I started translating, guiding the conversation about a new campaign, my words precise. Ahmad asked about cultural preferences, and I leaned in, explaining how color choices mattered in his market, how red could signal celebration or caution depending on context. Ethan cut in, his tone bright but clueless, suggesting we use an AI tool to optimize the copy, as if software could understand Ahmad's values. I froze my pen, pausing mid-note. Ahmad paused too, then politely asked me to clarify, his voice tinged with confusion. I corrected Ethan's suggestion, keeping my voice even, but my hands shook under the table, my nails digging into my palms. After the call, Nathan pulled me aside, his office, a sterile fortress of leather and cologne. The air felt too thick, his desk gleaming under harsh lights. He said Ethan's ideas were the future, and I needed to adapt or step aside, his words, sharp, deliberate. I opened my mouth, ready to list the deals I'd closed, the trust I'd earned, the nights I'd spent memorizing clients' needs. But he waved me off, his hand dismissive, saying I was too sensitive, stuck in the past, my methods a burden. My cheeks burned, a flush creeping up my neck. Sensitive, I'd spent years perfecting my work, learning the rhythm of Ahmad's speech, the stories behind his business. I walked out, his words clawing at me, each one a cut deeper than the last. Back at my desk, I found a note tucked under my keyboard, handwritten, unsigned, the paper slightly creased. You're irreplaceable. Don't let them win. I glanced around, but no one met my eye. The office a blur of lowered heads and hurried typing. Samantha was at a meeting, her chair empty across the hall. I slipped the note into my pocket, my heart racing, the words, a flicker of hope, but fragile like a candle in a storm. Who left it? Why hide? The gesture felt kind but fleeting, a spark that could flicker out under Nathan's weight. I tried to focus. Pulling up Ahmad's project brief, its details familiar, comforting. But my email pinged again, a team-wide message from Nathan, his tone triumphant. He praised Ethan for innovative thinking on today's call, his name bolded, mine absent. I stared at the screen, my pulse loud in my ears, a drumbeat of anger. Innovative. He'd nearly botched the deal, his suggestion tone-deaf, ignorant of Ahmad's world. I thought of Dad, how he'd sit with me patient, teaching me to listen, to understand, his hands steady as he corrected my pronunciation. He'd say the world rewarded those who cared. But here caring felt like a liability, a weight dragging me under. Samantha texted, asking to meet after work, her message a lifeline I grabbed. I agreed, needing her steadiness, her belief in me. But as I packed up my bag heavy with files I might never need, I overheard Ethan in the break room laughing with another new hire, his voice sharp and careless. He said the old guard was dragging the company down, naming me specifically, his tone dripping with disdain. My stomach twisted, a sickening lurch. I wanted to confront him, to tell him about the nights I'd spent studying, the trust I'd built, the clients who called me by name. But my throat closed up, and I slipped out the note in my pocket, feeling heavier with every step, its words a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I met Samantha at a diner across town, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that burned your tongue, the air thick with grease and nostalgia. She slid into the booth, her eyes scanning me like she was checking for cracks, her scarf loose around her neck. I told her about Ethan's break room jab, how he'd called me a drag on the company, his words a blade I couldn't dodge. She reached for my hand, her fingers warm, but I pulled back, stirring my coffee instead, the spoon clinking against the mug. I didn't want pity. I wanted to scream, to shatter the quiet of this place. She said she'd talk to Claire in HR, see if there was a way to push back, her voice steady but strained. I nodded, but my heart wasn't in it. Claire was nice, her office always tidy. But she answered to Nathan, her hands tied by his rules. Back home, I kicked off my shoes, the hardwood cool under my feet, and sank onto the couch. My apartment was quiet. The city's hum, a faint pulse outside my window, streetlights casting long shadows. I opened my laptop, hoping to lose myself in work, but a new email from Ahmad stopped me cold. Its subject line stark. He asked why Ethan was now listed as his main contact, his tone polite but confused. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading. I typed a reply explaining I was still here, my fingers hesitant, each word heavy. What if Nathan saw it? What if he twisted it against me, turned my outreach into another strike? I called Rachel, needing her fire to spark mine, the phone cold against my ear. She answered, her voice sharp with worry, her usual rush softened by my tone. I told her about the shadowing, Ethan's rise, Nathan's dismissal, each word spilling out raw and unfiltered. She said I should lawyer up Sue for ageism, anything to fight, her voice rising fierce as always. I paced my living room, the carpet rough under my feet, my shadow moving across the walls. Fight, I could barely breathe, my chest tight with a grief I couldn't name. She pushed harder, saying Dad would have fought, his courage a legacy I was letting slip. Her words hit like a slap, sharp and stinging. Dad wasn't here. He didn't know this world, this Nathan, this Ethan stealing my place with a smirk and a stolen slide deck. I hung up my eyes, stinging the phone heavy in my hand. The note from the office sat on my counter, its words mocking me, a faint smudge of ink at the edge. Irreplaceable. Then why was I being erased, my name scrubbed from emails and plans? I opened a drawer, pulling out an old client letter. I'd kept one from a Qatari partner who'd thanked me for catching a translation error that saved their campaign, his words formal but heartfelt. I'd framed it once proud, hanging it above my desk. Now it felt like a relic, proof of a life slipping away, its paper yellowing at the edges. The next day I walked into the office, my stomach in knots, the air heavy with the scent of copier toner. Claire caught me in the hall, her voice low, her eyes darting to check for eavesdroppers. She said Nathan was scheduling performance reviews, and mine was next, her words clipped urgent. She warned me to keep my head down, play along, her hand brushing my arm. I nodded, but my blood ran cold, a chill settling in my bones. Play along, I'd spent years proving myself, my work flawless, my clients loyal. I sat at my desk, the hum of the office deafening, a relentless drone. Ethan's laughter rang out again, this time from a meeting room, its glass walls exposing his confidence. I peeked through, my breath catching. He was presenting my campaign plan, my notes, my ideas to a room of nodding heads, their approval a theft I couldn't stop. I gripped my pen, the plastic creaking my knuckles white. My father's voice echoed, telling me to stand tall, his words a memory from our old porch swing. But I felt small, invisible, my worth dissolving in the air. Another email landed, this one from Nathan's assistant, her tone formal. The review was tomorrow, and I needed to prepare a self-assessment. Self-assessment, I wanted to write how I'd carried this team, how Ahmad trusted me, how I'd honored my father's lessons with every careful word. But as I stared at the blank screen, Ethan's voice droning through the glass, I felt the walls closing in, my worth crumbling with every word. He stole my reflection in the monitor, a stranger I didn't recognize. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, the performance review looming like a storm, dark and heavy. My apartment was dark, the morning light barely creeping through the blinds, casting thin slivers across the floor. I dressed slowly. Choosing a blazer my father once said made me look unstoppable, its navy fabric crisp against my skin. I needed that today, that strength he saw in me. At the office, I clutched a folder of client testimonials, proof of my worth, their pages creased from my grip. The elevator ride felt endless, each ding tightening the vice around my chest, the air stale with recycled coolness. I whispered to myself, "Stand tall," Dad's words, my only armor, my voice barely audible. Nathan's office was all glass and steel cold, as his stare the room too bright, too exposed. Claire sat beside him, her notepad open, her expression unreadable, her pen poised like a judge's gavel. Ethan was there too, leaning against a cabinet, his smirk sharp enough to cut his posture casual but calculated. Nathan didn't waste time, his voice clipped authoritative. He said the company was moving forward and I wasn't part of the plan. My role was redundant. He claimed my methods obsolete, each word a deliberate strike. I opened my folder ready to argue, my fingers trembling, but he raised a hand silencing me, his gesture final. I tried to speak, my voice shaking, barely holding together. I said I was the only one who spoke Arabic, that clients like Ahmed relied on me, their trust built over years of calls and care. Nathan laughed, a short barking sound that hit like a punch echoing in the sterile room. He said software could handle translations now, and Ethan was already proving it, his tone dismissive final. I glanced at Ethan, his eyes glinting with triumph, his fingers drumming lightly on the cabinet. I wanted to scream that software couldn't understand culture, couldn't build trust, couldn't know Ahmad's world. But my words caught tangled in the weight of their dismissal, my throat tight. Claire shifted her pen, pausing, her eyes flickering with unease. She asked Nathan if he'd reviewed the client feedback I'd submitted, her voice cautious but firm. He waved her off, saying feedback didn't matter when the company needed fresh blood. His words sharp-cutting. Fresh blood. The phrase burned each syllable, stripping away years of work, my late nights, my careful notes. I thought of my father, how he'd beam when I'd practice Arabic with him, his hands clapping at my progress, his kitchen filled with the scent of mint tea. He'd believed in me. Now I felt like I was failing him, shrinking under Nathan's gaze, my reflection in the glass walls, small and fragile. Nathan leaned forward, his voice low, final, his eyes unyielding. He said I was done effective immediately, and I needed to clear my desk by noon. The room spun. Claire's face blurring Ethan's smirk, a cruel anchor, his presence a weight I couldn't shake. I stood, my legs unsteady, and said I'd built those accounts from nothing, my voice cracking louder than I meant. I said Ahmad wouldn't work with Ethan, that they'd lose everything, my words spilling out raw and desperate. Nathan's eyes narrowed, and he called me desperate, a relic clinging to a dying role, his tone venomous. I turned to leave my folder, slipping to the floor, pages scattering like fallen leaves. Ethan snorted, muttering something about melodrama, his voice low but cutting. I froze, my heart pounding a wild rhythm in my chest. I wanted to grab those pages, shove them in Nathan's face, make him see the years I'd given. But my hands wouldn't move, frozen by shame and rage. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood in the hallway alone. The hum of the office muffled a distant roar. My father's voice faded, replaced by Nathan's words, useless, redundant, echoing, until they were all I could hear a chorus of my undoing. I stumbled into the conference room for the team meeting, my eyes stinging, the weight of Nathan's words still crushing me, each one a stone on my chest. My colleagues were already seated, their faces a mix of pity and unease, their eyes skittering away from mine. I took a chair in the back, hoping to disappear, my bag heavy on my lap, the strap digging into my shoulder. Nathan strode in, his voice booming, filling the room with false warmth. He announced a new chapter for the company, his gestures grand, then turned to Ethan, who stood all confidence, ready to present. My stomach lurched when I saw the slide deck on the screen. It was mine, the one I'd spent weeks perfecting for Ahmad's campaign, its colors and fonts, unmistakably my work. Ethan clicked through, explaining strategies I'd crafted, passing them off as his own, his voice smooth, practiced. The room clapped, oblivious, their applause a betrayal that burned in my chest. I gripped the edge of my seat, my nails digging into the wood, the grain rough under my fingers. Nathan beamed, then turned to me, his smile sharp, predatory. He said it was time to clear out the old, to make way for visionaries like Ethan, his words deliberate, cutting. He called me a cautionary tale, someone who couldn't keep up his voice loud enough for the room to hear. The room went silent, eyes darting to me, then away, a collective flinch that stung worse than words. I wanted to stand, to shout that those were my ideas, my late nights, my father's legacy woven into every word, every slide. But my voice was gone, swallowed by the heat in my face, my cheeks flushed with shame. Samantha across the table mouthed something, her eyes fierce, but I couldn't make it out, the room too loud with my own heartbeat. Ethan kept talking, his voice grating, claiming he'd streamlined the process, made it efficient. Streamlined. He hadn't even spoken to Ahmad, hadn't learned the names of his kids or the stories behind his business, the details I'd memorized over years. Nathan stepped forward, his tone final, his posture rigid. He said my departure was a lesson in adaptability, that the company needed people who embraced change, not fought it. His eyes locked on mine, daring me to respond. I felt every gaze, every whisper like needles pricking my skin. My hands shook and I clutched my bag, the strap cutting into my palm, a sharp grounding pain. I thought of my father, how he'd tell me to hold my head high, his voice steady in my memory. But all I felt was shame, raw and suffocating, a weight that pinned me to the chair. As I stood to leave, my legs unsteady, Samantha slipped something into my hand, a small USB drive, her fingers brushing mine, warm and quick. She whispered, "You're not done," her voice a lifeline in the chaos. I shoved it into my pocket, barely registering her words, my mind a fog of hurt. The room spun. Nathan's voice fading into a dull roar, the applause a distant echo. I walked out, my steps heavy, the USB a faint weight against the void inside me. I was nothing here, stripped bare. My father's pride in me shattered on the floor, scattered like the pages I'd left behind. I sat in my car outside the office, the USB drive from Samantha, burning a hole in my pocket, its edges sharp against my thigh. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white as Nathan's words echoed cautionary tale obsolete, each one a wound that wouldn't close. I wanted to drive away, leave it all behind, the office's glass facade gleaming mockingly in the sunlight. But my father's voice tugged at me, soft but steady, from a memory of us on our old porch swing. "Stand tall, Clara," he'd said, his eyes bright with belief. I pulled out the drive, turning it over in my fingers, its surface cool and smooth. Samantha's whisper, "You're not done," felt like a lifeline, fragile but real, a thread I could still hold. At home, I plugged the drive into my laptop, the screen's glow harsh in my dim living room. It held client contacts, project notes, years of my work meticulously organized. A sticky note on the drive read in Samantha's scrawl, "They need you," the ink slightly smudged, as if written in haste. My throat tightened, a lump I couldn't swallow. I opened my email, Ahmad's message from days ago, staring back, asking why Ethan was his contact, his confusion a mirror of my own. I started typing, my fingers hesitant at first, the cursor blinking like a challenge. I told him I'd been let go, that I was going freelance, and I'd love to keep working with him, my words careful, but honest. I hit send before I could overthink it, my heart pounding a mix of fear and defiance. I called Samantha, my voice shaky but firm, the phone warm against my ear. She answered on the first ring, her tone urgent like she'd been waiting. I thanked her for the drive, asked if she'd help me draft a proposal, my words spilling out faster than I meant. She laughed, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds, and said she'd be over in an hour. I hung up, pacing my living room, the carpet soft under my bare feet, the air smelling faintly of lavender from a candle I'd lit. For the first time in days, I felt a spark, small but growing, like I was reclaiming something stolen, a piece of myself I'd almost lost. Samantha arrived with takeout and a notebook, her energy grounding me, her bag slung over her shoulders, spilling pens. We sat at my kitchen table, papers spread out, the smell of fried rice mixing with the coffee I'd brewed. We mapped a freelance plan, my voice steadier as I outlined my strengths: Arabic fluency, cultural expertise, client trust, earned over years. She pushed me to charge what I was worth, her pen tapping the table, her eyes fierce with belief. I hesitated, doubt creeping in a shadow of Nathan's voice. What if Nathan found out? What if Ahmad said no? But Samantha's eyes locked on mine, unwavering. "You're not just good, Clara. You're essential," she said, her words a spark that caught. I dug through a box in my closet, the air musty, and found my father's old Arabic dictionary, its pages worn from years of use, the spine cracked but intact. I flipped it open, tracing his handwritten notes in the margins, his script small and precise. He'd taught me to see language as connection, not just words, his voice patient as we sat under lamplight. I set the dictionary beside my laptop, a quiet promise, its presence steadying me. I wasn't done. Not yet. As I typed up the proposal, each word felt like a step, a way to rebuild what Nathan tried to break, my fingers finding a rhythm that felt like mine. Samantha left after midnight, our proposal polished, a lifeline to a future I could almost see, its pages crisp under my fingers. I sat alone at my table, the dictionary open, my father's notes a quiet guide, their ink faded but clear. My phone buzzed. Ahmad's reply glowing on the screen, his words formal but warm. He was disappointed I'd been let go, but eager to work together, his trust a weight I felt in my bones. He asked me to join Monday's meeting no matter what, his confidence in me a spark I hadn't felt in weeks. My breath caught sharp and quick. This was real. I wasn't just fighting for a job anymore. I was fighting for myself, for the woman my father raised. I needed perspective, someone who'd seen me at my strongest before Nathan's shadow. I called Marcus, a former colleague who'd left the firm years ago to start his own consultancy, his office now a small loft downtown. His voice was warm, steady, like he'd been expecting me, the line crackling faintly. I told him everything: Nathan's cruelty, Ethan's theft, my freelance leap, my voice spilling out, raw but clear. He listened, his silence patient, then offered to connect me with 2 clients who needed Arabic expertise. His words a lifeline I grabbed. I scribbled their names on a notepad, my hand steady for the first time in weeks, the pen's ink dark and sure. The next morning I met Marcus at a coffee shop, its walls lined with local art, the air thick with roasted beans. He slid a business card across the table, its edges sharp, his eyes kind but firm. He said my skills were rare, my relationships rarer, his voice low, deliberate. I nodded, clutching the card, feeling its weight, a tangible step forward. He warned me Nathan might push back, maybe even threaten legal action for reaching out to clients, his tone cautious but steady. My stomach twisted, a flicker of fear, but I pushed it down, my fingers tracing the card's embossed letters. I'd face that if it came. I told myself, my resolve hardening. Back home, I opened my laptop, the screen's glow soft in the morning light. I drafted emails to Marcus's contacts, each word feeling like carving a new path. One Nathan couldn't touch my keyboard, clicking rhythmically. I thought of my father, how he'd sit with me under the porch light, teaching me to read Arabic poetry. His voice soft, each line a world. He'd say every line held meaning, a story to tell. I was building my world now, line by line, word by word. I saved the drafts, my chest lighter, the weight of the office fading like a fog lifting slowly. I stood stretching my muscles stiff from hours at the table and walked to my window. Chicago sparkled below, alive and vast, its lights a constellation of possibility. My phone pinged a text from Rachel, checking in, her words short but warm. I smiled, typing a quick reply, promising to call soon, my fingers steady. I didn't need her fire right now. I had my own, a quiet flame growing stronger. I picked up my father's dictionary, closing it gently, its weight familiar, and set it on my desk. My eyes settled on the proposal, printed and ready. Its pages neat, my name bold at the top. I touched it, my fingers tracing the title, a quiet vow. I was enough. I arrived at Ahmad's meeting on Monday. My proposal tucked in a leather folder, its texture smooth under my fingers. My heart a steady drum. The conference room was sleek, all glass and city views, the skyline sharp against a gray sky. Ahmad's team gathered around a polished table, their voices low, professional. He greeted me warmly, his handshake firm, his eyes crinkling with a smile that felt like trust. He introduced me as their trusted consultant, his words carrying weight, and I took a seat, my smile tight but genuine, my shoulders straighter than they'd been in weeks. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not as an employee bound by Nathan's rules, but as myself, Clara, with something to give. I presented my plan, my voice clear, weaving in cultural insights. Only years of work could teach how Ahmad's clients valued personal touches, like handwritten notes for major deals. His team leaned in, nodding, asking sharp questions about market trends. I answered with ease, my words flowing like a current. Halfway through, my phone buzzed in my bag. A muted hum, I ignored my focus, locked on the room, on the trust I'd earned. When we broke for coffee, the air rich with roasted beans, Ahmad pulled me aside, his eyes bright, his voice low. He offered a 6-month contract, exclusive, with a rate that made my breath catch, his confidence in me a weight I welcomed. I shook his hand, my pulse racing, but steady, my smile real. Back at my car, I checked my phone, the screen cold against my fingers. A voicemail from Claire, her voice hushed, urgent, the office noise faint in the background. Nathan had heard about my outreach and was furious, calling it client poaching, his words a threat she relayed carefully. He'd emailed Ahmad demanding he cut ties with me, his tone sharp, vindictive. My stomach dropped, a cold knot forming. I replayed the message, her words sinking in, each one a stone. Nathan wasn't letting go, his anger a shadow I couldn't outrun. I leaned against the steering wheel, the leather cool under my palms, and closed my eyes, the city's hum distant. I'd expected pushback, but this felt personal, a blade aimed at my new start, cutting deeper than I'd prepared for. I drove home, the city blurring past, headlights streaking like tears. At my apartment, I opened my laptop, Ahmad's contract draft waiting in my inbox, its clauses clear, promising. I read it twice, each word a lifeline. But Nathan's shadow loomed, his threat a weight I couldn't ignore. I called Marcus, needing his calm, his voice a steady anchor. He said Nathan's threats were empty, a bully's tantrum. But to watch my back, his tone cautious but firm. I hung up, my hands cold, the phone heavy. I thought of my father, how he'd face storms with quiet resolve, his eyes steady even in chaos. I wanted that strength, but fear gnawed at me, sharp and unyielding, a whisper that I might lose this too. My doorbell rang, startling me, a sharp chime in the quiet. It was Samantha. Her face flushed, carrying a bottle of wine and news, her coat damp from a sudden rain. She'd heard Ethan botched a call with another client. His translations garbled the deal, teetering on collapse. Nathan was scrambling his office, a storm of panic, but no one mentioned me. My absence a silent wound. I poured us glasses, the wine sharp on my tongue, its tang grounding me. I listened as she described the office chaos, her voice alive with details, papers strewn, Nathan's voice raised. I wanted to feel vindicated, a spark of triumph, but all I felt was weight, Nathan's anger a storm cloud. I couldn't outrun its shadow, heavy on my new beginning. Samantha's words hung in the air. The office chaos she described, a distant hum against the quiet of my apartment, the rain tapping softly on my windows. I sipped my wine, its bitterness sharp, and set the glass down the table's wood cool under my fingers. She kept talking, saying Nathan's team was unraveling without me, clients' frustrated deals slipping. But her voice faded, drowned by my own thoughts. I stood walking to the kitchen counter, my eyes landing on a small wooden box where I kept my father's old watch, its face scratched from years of wear. I hadn't touched it in months, but now I lifted the lid, the ticking faint but steady, a rhythm that felt like him. I sat back down, the watch in my hand, its weight grounding me, its metal cool against my palm. Samantha paused, her eyes softening, and asked if I was okay, her voice gentle, searching. I nodded, but my throat was tight, words stuck. I told her about Ahmad's contract, how it felt like a victory, a step forward. But Nathan's email to him had shaken me, his threat a shadow over my new path. She said he was bluffing, her tone firm, but I saw her hesitate, her fingers twisting the stem of her glass, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Even she wasn't sure, her confidence a fragile shield. The next morning I checked my email, half expecting a retraction from Ahmad, my heart braced for loss. Instead, there was a note from one of Marcus's contacts, a Kuwaiti firm, praising my proposal and requesting a meeting, their words formal but warm. I exhaled a small relief, and it didn't reach the ache inside a hollow space Nathan's threats had carved. I dressed for the day, choosing a scarf my father once bought me in Cairo, its silk cool against my neck, its colors vibrant against my muted mood. I needed him with me, even if just in memory, his presence a quiet strength. At a cafe I met Marcus again, his smile warm but cautious, his jacket slightly wrinkled from the drive. He handed me a folder with market research, its pages dense with data showing gaps only I could fill in the industry. He said Nathan's firm was losing ground, clients asking for me by name, their emails frustrated, searching. I wanted to feel proud, my chest swelling with validation, but his next words stopped me cold. He'd heard Ethan was spreading rumors, calling me unprofessional, saying I'd abandoned my team, his lies spreading like wildfire. I stared at my coffee, the steam gone, my reflection warped in the dark liquid, a distorted version of myself. I drove home, the scarf still around my neck, its colors vivid against my muted thoughts, the city's noise a dull roar. Rachel called, her voice bright, asking about the contract, her enthusiasm a contrast to my quiet. I told her it was real, a step forward, but my tone was flat, my words heavy. She went quiet, then said she was proud, her voice soft, but I barely heard her, my mind elsewhere. I parked, staring at my building's brick facade, its cracks familiar grounding. The watch was still in my pocket, its ticking faint. I'd won something, a small victory, but Nathan's shadow, Ethan's lies, and the silence of those who'd once cheered me left a hollow space. Nothing could fill a void that echoed with my father's absence. I woke to sunlight spilling through my bedroom window, soft and golden, warming the hardwood floor, its grain worn but familiar. My new workspace, a corner desk by the window, was cluttered with notes and a single framed letter from a client. Its words simple but kind, its frame slightly crooked. I'd set it up last night, arranging pens, a lamp, and a small clay pot I'd bought on a whim at a market, its surface rough under my fingers. Freelancing was real now, my days shaped by emails and calls, not Nathan's shadow, my rhythm, my own. I brewed coffee, the aroma grounding me rich and warm, and sat to check my schedule, the laptop's hum a quiet companion. The Kuwaiti firm had confirmed our meeting, their email precise, professional, and Ahmad's contract was signed, a quiet victory that felt like a step forward. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, its warmth spreading through me, the mug heavy in my hands. For the first time, I wasn't running from something, wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was building piece by piece a life I chose. I thought of my father, not with the ache of loss, but with a softer memory, his laugh when I'd mispronounce a word, his hand steady on my shoulder, his eyes bright with pride. He'd see this, I thought, and smile, his voice a memory I carried like a talisman. My phone buzzed, a text from Samantha, asking to visit, her words bright, eager. I replied, inviting her over, craving her familiar energy, her laugh that always cut through my doubts. She arrived with pastries, her hair pulled back, her eyes brighter than I'd seen in weeks, her scarf trailing as she moved. We sat on my couch, crumbs on our plates, the air sweet with sugar. She shared news, her voice quick, excited. Nathan's firm was faltering, clients pulling back after Ethan's mistakes, their emails sharp with frustration. She said she was thinking of leaving, inspired by my leap. Her words a spark that warmed me. I listened, my heart full, not with triumph over Nathan, but with a quiet pride in her courage and the bond we'd kept. I stood to refill our mugs, pausing at the window, the glass cool against my palm. The street below was alive, people moving with purpose, their steps quick against the pavement. I'd been one of them, rushing to an office that broke me, my days dictated by someone else's vision. Now I moved at my own pace, my choices my own. Samantha joined me, her shoulder brushing mine, her presence steady. She said I looked different, lighter. Her voice soft but certain. I nodded, not trusting my voice, my throat tight with gratitude. I felt it too, a weight lifting, not gone but softer, like a bruise fading under careful touch, a healing I hadn't expected. Samantha left, her laughter lingering as the door clicked shut, the sound echoing in my quiet apartment. I stood by the couch, the room still, the city's hum, a soft pulse outside, streetlights casting long shadows. I walked to my desk, my fingers brushing the clay pot, its smooth surface cool, grounding. I'd filled it with soil yesterday, a small act, but mine a choice that felt like a beginning. I opened my laptop, an email from Ahmed waiting, inviting me to a conference next month. His words warm, calling me a partner, not just a hire. I smiled, the kind that felt new, unforced, my reflection in the screen softer than before. I called Rachel, my voice steady, the phone warm against my ear. She answered, her usual rush, softened, sensing my calm, her voice a familiar cadence. I told her about the contract, the desk, the pot, my words simple but true. She laughed, saying I sounded like Dad, finding joy in small things, her voice bright with memory. I swallowed her words, a gentle ache, a reminder of his quiet strength. We talked longer about her work, our childhood, the fights we'd had over small things, now distant. I said I was sorry for pushing her away, my voice low, honest. She went quiet, then said she loved me, her words a warmth I felt deep. I hung up, my chest full, my heart steadier. I stepped outside, the evening air crisp, carrying the scent of rain, the pavement glistening faintly. My neighbor's garden caught my eye, a patch of green I'd never noticed, its flowers vibrant against the dusk. I thought of planting something, maybe herbs, something to tend to grow with care. My phone buzzed, a message from Marcus urging me to take on a new client, his words encouraging but firm. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, doubt flickering. I'd been afraid of failing, of stretching too far, of losing what I'd built. But now, I typed a reply agreeing to meet them, my fingers sure, my choice clear. Back inside, I sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, the fabric soft against my back. The pot sat on the windowsill, catching the last light, its clay warm in the glow. I thought of my father, not his lessons, but his quiet moments reading by lamplight, content in his own space. I'd spent so long proving myself to Nathan, to the world, my worth tied to their approval. Now I just wanted to live in my own rhythm. I closed my eyes, the room still, my breath slow even. I was home, not just in this space, but in myself, a peace I'd fought to find. Months passed, each day a small stitch in a new life, each choice a thread I wove myself. I woke early now, the quiet of dawn, my favorite hour, the world still before the city woke. My apartment smelled of fresh herbs, basil and mint sprouting in pots along the windowsill, their leaves bright alive. I'd started gardening, a habit that surprised me, my hands learning the patience of soil, the slow reward of growth. My desk hummed with work contracts from Ahmed and new clients, each email a step further from the office that once broke me, its walls, a memory I no longer carried. I wasn't rich, but I was steady, my days shaped by my own hands, and that was enough. I drove to a nearby cemetery one Sunday, the air cool, the sky wide and cloudless, a blue that felt endless. My father's grave was simple, a stone etched with his name, moss creeping at its edges. I sat cross-legged, grass damp under me, the earth cool and grounding. I spoke to him, my voice low, telling him about the conference, how I'd stood on a stage. my voice clear, sharing what he'd taught me about connection, about care. The crowd had clapped, but I'd felt in most his pride, a warmth I carried in my chest. I placed a pebble on his stone, a quiet ritual I'd begun, its weight small but certain, like a promise kept. Back home, I found an email from Samantha. Her words bright, eager. She'd left Nathan's firm, joining me on a project, her ideas sharp and bright, her energy a spark that lifted me. We'd meet tomorrow, sketching plans over coffee, our laughter already filling the space in my mind. I smiled, grateful for her, for the way she saw me whole, not broken. My phone buzzed, Rachel's name on the screen, her text short but warm. She'd visited last week, her hug fierce, her eyes soft with understanding, a look I hadn't seen in years. We were closer now, our old tensions smoothed by time, our words softer, kinder. I walked to my kitchen, pouring tea, the steam curling upward, fragrant with chamomile. The herbs caught the light, their leaves vivid, a small life I'd nurtured. I thought of the woman I'd been scrambling to prove myself, my worth, tied to a place that didn't see me, its walls cold, its voices cruel. Now I worked for myself, my days shaped by choices I made, not ones forced on me. I sat by the window, tea warm in my hands, the city alive below, its pulse steady matching mine. I was still healing, but I was here, and that felt like a beginning, a quiet victory I hadn't known I could claim. The conference came a blur of faces and voices in a downtown hotel, its halls buzzing with energy. I stood at the podium, my notes simple, a single sheet. I barely needed my words, drawn from years of listening, connecting, building. I spoke about trust, how it grows in the quiet spaces between words, and the care we take to understand, to hear the unspoken. The room was still, eyes on me, their attention a weight I welcomed. I felt steady, not performing, just sharing, my voice clear. My father's lessons alive in every word. When I finished, applause rose warm and full, filling the room like a tide. I stepped down, my heart quiet, knowing I'd honored my father's gift, his belief in me, a light that never faded. Samantha met me after, her grin wide, her scarf slipping as she hugged me. She said we'd landed a new project together, her voice bright with possibility. We walked to a nearby park, the grass soft under our shoes, the air fresh with spring. We sat on a bench, the wood worn but warm, and she talked about her plans, her voice alive, her hands moving with excitement. I listened, grateful for this partnership, this new rhythm we'd found together. I thought of Nathan, his firm now, a footnote, its chaos no longer mine, a distant storm I'd outrun. I'd carried anger, once sharp and heavy, a weight that dragged me down. But it had softened, not because he deserved it, but because I did, because I deserved to be free. I started a scholarship in my father's name, a small fund for students learning Arabic, a quiet way to pass on what he gave me. It wasn't grand, just a few $1,000s, but it felt right, a seed planted for someone else's dream. I'd visit his grave again soon, tell him about it, leave another pebble, its weight, a promise to keep going. My life wasn't perfect, bills piled up. Doubts lingered like shadows, but it was mine, built on my terms. I'd learned to measure my worth, not by applause or titles, not by Nathan's gaze or Ethan's lies, but by the choices I made, the people I lifted, the truth I held close in my heart. The lesson wasn't loud or sudden, a quiet truth that grew in the slow work of rebuilding. It came in the moments I chose myself, my own story, over someone else's version of me. We all have that power to decide who we are when the world tries to define us, to stand in our own light, even when it flickers. It's not about winning or being right, not about proving them wrong. It's about knowing you're enough, even in the quiet, even when no one else sees. What's a moment when you had to choose yourself, when you stood in your own light? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. It's how we connect, how we grow, how we heal together. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to join me for more to share in these journeys. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone searching for their own light. Thank you for being here, for listening, for carrying your own stories. Here's to healing, to finding our way one step at a time.